All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously detailed presentation that makes a massive, bold claim. The biblical end-time system isn't Western at all, but rather Middle Eastern and Islamic. The book of Revelation has obviously sparked intense debate for centuries, but the source we're analyzing today insists the key to understanding it isn't found in modern news headlines. It's buried right there in the ancient scriptures. So, let's play detective for a bit and map out exactly how the author connects these scriptural clues to form a highly specific geographic and political profile. Here is our detective board for today. We'll start with a new prophetic framework, move into Daniel's foundational visions, map out the geography of the Antichrist, confirm the timeline, and finally, reveal the ultimate beast.
So, Part 1. Rethinking the End Times with a brand new prophetic framework.
The author of our source makes a really strong point here. If you want to understand prophecy, you've got to let the ancient texts speak for themselves. Forget modern headlines for a second. Now, for centuries, the traditional eschatological view kind of pasted these prophecies onto Rome, the European Union, or some revived Western political system. But our source totally flips the script. It challenges that Western-centric view head-on, arguing that the final adversary actually arises strictly from the Middle East as an Islamic caliphate. It's a massive paradigm shift.
Moving on to Part 2, Daniel's foundational visions, specifically looking at the Iron Kingdom. To build this Middle Eastern profile, the author takes us way back to the book of Daniel. There's this famous story where an ancient king has a dream about a giant, multi-metal statue representing future empires. It starts with a gold head for Babylon, goes down to silver for Medo-Persia, and then bronze for Greece. But we really need to focus on the iron legs. Traditional views usually label this iron as Rome. However, the author argues that Roman influence in the Middle East actually vanished centuries ago. So instead, they argue these two iron legs represent the Sunni and Shia branches of the Islamic Caliphate, an empire that, remember, historically controlled that specific region for 1,300 years and, according to this theory, endures right until the very end.
Now, the author connects the iron legs of that statue straight to the terrifying iron teeth of the fourth beast mentioned in Daniel chapter 7. This beast literally crushes and devours everything in its path. But here's the critical clue. It has 10 horns. The presentation maps these 10 horns to modern Middle Eastern Islamic nations. Think places like Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. And importantly, these nations all arose right after the Ottoman Empire collapsed back in 1924.
But wait, out of those 10 nations, a totally distinct new figure emerges. And that brings us to the ultimate question of this entire theory. Who exactly is this new adversary, known in the scriptures as the Little Horn?
According to the source, this little horn is the Islamic Mahdi, or the biblical Antichrist. And the profile is incredibly specific. It emerges from the Middle East, speaks blatant blasphemy, and essentially wages all-out war against the saints. But the author makes a really crucial point here. This conflict is not just military. It is deeply, fundamentally religious. The biblical prophecy talks about altering laws, and the source explicitly interprets this as the literal imposition of Islamic Sharia law over a period of exactly 3.5 years.
All right, Part 3, anchoring the prophecy by mapping out the geography of the Antichrist.
To really nail down the location, the author points right to the text, which says this: Little Horn expands south toward Egypt, east toward Persia, and most importantly, toward the glorious land of Israel. The source heavily emphasizes that this adversary emerges from the ancient divided Greek Empire, and it is constantly shifting its focus toward the Middle East, specifically targeting the nation of Israel. For the author, this is the absolute definitive proof that we're dealing with a non-Western origin. It's all about the geography.
Adding even more detail to our detective board, Daniel chapter 11 introduces a figure called the King of the North. This gives us a leader who doesn't just use brute military force, but relies heavily on calculated intrigue, deception, and flattery. And it gets darker, because this leader's power crosses over from just political dominance right into extreme religious corruption, ultimately demanding total, absolute worship from everyone.
Let's hit Part 4, confirming the timeline and looking at the New Testament bridge.
Before we get to the grand finale, the presentation pauses to check the New Testament. Did Jesus or the Apostle Paul somehow alter this historical Middle Eastern blueprint? Well, according to the source, they absolutely didn't. Jesus explicitly warns of a future abomination of desolation, and Paul writes all about a coming man of sin.
The author is quick to note that neither of them introduces some brand new Western paradigm. Instead, they perfectly maintain Daniel's exact profile, a self-exalting, lawless ruler who is tied strictly, once again, to the Middle East.
Which brings us to Part 5, the climax of Revelation and the final beast revealed.
With the foundational profile totally locked in, the source finally takes us to the book of Revelation, where the beast is said to speak great blasphemies. The author argues that this perfectly echoes the little horn's blasphemy from Daniel. In fact, they map it directly to Islam's core declarations, specifically the Islamic Shahada, combined with the historical denial of Jesus' crucifixion and the denial that God actually has a son. Within this framework, that is viewed as the ultimate defiance against God that the Apostle John was describing.
There's also this fascinating part in Revelation about a beast with a deadly wound that is healed. The author interprets this not as a literal human being magically coming back to life, but as an imperial power that somehow survives a fatal, total collapse. The historical cycle they lay out works exactly like this. First, you have the original Islamic Caliphate. Second, it transforms into the Ottoman Empire, which, as we mentioned earlier, suffered a quote-unquote deadly wound when it totally collapsed in 1924. And finally, the future healed wound, which the author argues will be a fully revived Islamic Caliphate.
Then we get to some of the most striking imagery in the entire Bible, straight from Revelation 17, the woman riding the scarlet beast. Now, moving sharply away from traditional Western interpretations, which usually view the woman as Catholicism, the presentation maps this directly to a partnered Islamic system. In this view, the woman represents the spiritual religion of Islam, and she rides, or essentially legitimizes, the beast, which represents the actual political caliphate system that enforces the Sharia law we talked about.
To clear up any possible confusion, the author organizes this massive prophetic threat into 5 distinct entities. On an individual level, you've got the unholy trinity, Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. Then, on a systemic level, you have the religious system of Islam and the political caliphate itself. By organizing all these complex ancient symbols, the source builds a completely unified, intensely Middle Eastern-focused theory of the end times.
We are going to wrap up this explainer with the creator's ultimate theological takeaway. Despite the incredibly intricate and honestly pretty intimidating profile of this adversary, the author leaves viewers with a critical reminder. Prophecy was never given to produce fear, it was given to give understanding. The source really emphasizes that this entire prophetic framework ultimately ends with Christ shattering the system forever. It is an absolutely fascinating look at how one theory weaves geography, history, and ancient texts into a single, cohesive narrative. So, what do you think? Does a Middle Eastern framework unlock the mysteries of Revelation better than the traditional Western view we are so used to? It definitely leaves us with a whole lot to think about.